I have never told this story to my children, and I have never told my wife. You see, there are things that truckers bury at the very bottom of their road chests, beneath dirty work gloves and old diesel receipts. You carry it with you for years, from highway to highway, until one fine Christmas Eve, sitting in your kitchen, you realize, if you do not record this onto tape right now, it will devour your memory to the bone. It will rot right inside your skull. It all started when I was 25. A young, foolish kid from Iowa. I had just landed a job with a major transport company in Minneapolis. We, the young ones, were drawn to that highway romance, you know? The opportunity to see this damn grand country completely for free. The endless sun-scorched steppes, the snow-covered rocky ridges of Wyoming, the impenetrable ancient forests of Oregon. And the fact that they paid you damn good money just for turning the wheel and looking out the window was pure freedom. But on the highways, things don't always go smoothly. Oh, far from it. There were minor, miserable breakdowns right in the middle of a dark, remote forest clearing, where you'd have to trudge 20 miles over frozen gravel to the nearest payphone. There were worse things too. Highway robbers, hijackers. In those years, those scumbags often operated on the remote highways of the Midwest. They would stalk lone rigs at dark rest stops, press a gun barrel to your temple, and take the truck along with the cargo. The company grew tired of it. Insurance premiums skyrocketed, and management made a decision. From then on, trucks would only be dispatched in tandems, 2 rigs on the same route. The only condition was a slight 15-minute delay between them to avoid congestion at way stations. But in case of any trouble, your partner could always arrive in time to help. I had gathered enough of those adventures during my first few years to fill an entire novel. Dangerous ones, funny ones, all kinds. But all of them paled, turned into nothing, into gray dust, after one heartbreaking incident on a cursed, snow-swept stretch of Route 12 in Montana. After that night, I took a 3-month leave, locked myself in my house, and drank bitter whiskey until my hands stopped shaking at the sight of falling snow outside my window. I remember it like it was yesterday. That fatal contract fell right in December, the very eve of the holidays, on the northeastern section of Route 12 through the Montana hills. There was a terrible ice storm. For a week, a blizzard howled so hard that the roadside poles bent to the ground. Our company was desperate to deliver a large shipment of commercial goods to a small town near Helena. The deliveries were failing not because the highway was closed. No, the federal services had cleared one lane, but because none of the old experienced drivers wanted to risk their necks for a few extra bills. The path there was long, winding, and damn dangerous. Then management called Ed and me. Edward Big Ed, my best friend, a 2-meter giant with hands like blacksmith hammers, who had been behind the wheel since he was practically in diapers. We were offered double pay for this run, and we young 25-year-old idiots, salivating out of greed, agreed on the spot. I was driving my cab over Freightliner FLA, a reliable, flat-nosed workhorse, perfect for winter roads. Ed followed behind in his conventional Peterbilt 379 with a 15-minute delay. Our only entertainment in that icy wilderness was talking over the radio. We sat on a private frequency, channel 19, and chattered without end. The weather was excellent. The sky over Montana was clear, and the frozen hills sparkled under the bright December sun. A true winter wonderland, to say the least. Exactly halfway through the route, we had a major scheduled stop. We pulled into a massive 24-hour pilot truck stop, and it was then, sitting at a plastic booth in the roadside diner waiting for my black coffee, that I lazily flipped through a local newspaper left by someone on the table. I stumbled upon a recent article. It said that near Lola Pass, a completely desolate, snowbound area on the Montana-Idaho border, About a week ago, another major accident had occurred on Route 12. 10 cars crashed, lots of injuries. I waved over the old pump attendant who was warming his hands by the heater and started asking him about Lola. What the old man told me in a whisper as he wiped the windshield of my truck made me run cold. The local drivers knew terrifying things about Lola Pass. A raging blizzard in the middle of a hot July was considered completely normal there. But what scared me most was the death toll. On the shoulders of that road, carved right into the rocky terrain, stood about 30 white wooden crosses, monuments to those who died in car crashes. And accidents occurred there year after year, with some wild, unnatural regularity. To be honest, I had never believed in the supernatural in my life. But the situation itself bogged me down. Why did so many rigs wreck on one short stretch of road? And why did the damn dispatchers at the base not say a single word about the danger? After everything I read, a heavy, sticky anxiety immediately washed over me. I had absolutely no desire to go any further. But backing out halfway through the route? The financial penalties were too high. So I silently finished my terrible, lukewarm coffee, walked out of the diner, and reluctantly headed toward the cab of my Freightliner. "Hey, Frank!" Ed's loud, crackling voice erupted from the radio speaker as soon as I started the engine. "What a load of fairy tales you got from that gas station guy. Don't tell me you've pissed your pants and want to turn back when we're more than halfway there." "No, everything's fine," I replied quietly, slowly pulling out of the truck stop parking lot. "It's just, don't you find all of this strange? You remember how our guys at the base flat out refused this run. And now there's this crash statistics. 30 crosses on the shoulder just over the last few years. It's a whole cemetery." All right, buddy. Take a breath and calm down." Ed's voice in the radio sounded steady. "You know yourself that a highway in winter is a high hazard zone. People make mistakes. They fall asleep at the wheel. Let's do this. As soon as we start climbing Lola Pass, we'll just slow down. We'll move slowly, carefully. Deal?" "Yeah, great. We'll do that." "Thanks, Ed," I said. My heavy rig surged forward, heading northeast toward that mountain pass. You know, in all my life, I've never been afraid of black ice. And I wasn't afraid of fog, that thick white soup that usually creeps out of the lowlands after a long rain. But on that fateful night, as my truck began to climb the winding road of Lola Pass, an unreasonable, suffocating dread enveloped me entirely, right to my fingertips. It was a sickening feeling, like you're standing at the open door of a plane, about to skydive, and your knees turn to jelly while you try with all your might to delay the inevitable. By the time I passed the old sawmill, the last sign of life before the pass, the sun had fully set. Twilight fell rapidly. The entire landscape around me, the ice-glazed gray cliffs, the frozen pines, shrank into dead, somber tones. I, a healthy 25-year-old man, shivered in my warm seat, but I kept my foot pressed on the gas, and the higher I climbed, the more frequently my headlights cut those cursed crosses out of the encroaching darkness. They stood in clusters of 3 or 4, constructed from wood darkened by moisture. All of this, combined with the rising fog that crept down from somewhere above, looked terribly right for a nightmare. At some point, it felt as though I wasn't driving on a federal highway at all, but rather navigating a multi-ton monster right through the middle of an abandoned graveyard at night. There wasn't a single oncoming car on the road. Absolute, ominous, dead emptiness. Nothing but the roar of my diesel engine. And then, in an instant, I caught that sound. A loud, heavy, metallic knocking somewhere deep inside the engine. The rig jerked violently, lost all power, and I had no choice but to immediately turn the wheel to the right, pull onto the snow-covered shoulder, and brake. I grabbed the radio handpiece, breathing heavily. Ed, do you copy? Over. I've got some weird noises coming from the engine block. Everything is grinding to hell. I need to step out and check. Just don't speed too much back there, you hear me? This fog has rolled in. Visibility is practically zero. I can't see a damn thing in front of the hood. I released the button and stared at the dashboard, waiting for my friend's familiar deep voice. But to my utter astonishment and horror, instead of Ed's voice, nothing but hollow, heavy static poured from the other side. A furious white noise. Our frequency was dead, replaced by a suffocating grave silence pierced only by this wild, oppressive static hiss. Ed, how do you read me? Over. And again, only that dense, repulsive noise. It felt as though something massive, hiding in these mountains, was actively jamming the civilian radio signal. Sitting alone with a broken rig in the middle of nowhere, with a bottomless, thick fog swirling just outside the windshield, was unbearable, but there was no other choice. I gripped my heavy metal maglite flashlight tighter, pulled on my jacket, and climbed out of the warm cab into the freezing cold. I walked around the cab of my Freightliner, preparing to unlatch the hood. But before I could take even 2 steps, a sharp, distinct snap echoed from somewhere ahead, from the dark, snow-covered forest edge along the shoulder. It sounded as though someone heavy had stepped on a frozen, dry branch with all their might while walking out of the thicket. My hand jerked automatically, and I aimed the flashlight beam toward the sound. At first, the light simply drowned in that cursed, impenetrable fog, illuminating only the swirling ice crystals and a gray wall of haze. I tried to convince myself it was just a large bird or a startled deer darting back into the woods. But if it had actually been a bird or a deer, would I be recording this tape right now? Right in the middle of the highway, in the yellow circle of my flashlight beam, a silhouette suddenly materialized. It was 7 feet tall, monstrously emaciated. But the terrifying part was its geometry. Its body seemed completely wrong. Long, unnatural limbs bent at impossible, jagged angles, and its gray skin was stretched so tightly over its bones that it looked as if there were no normal skeleton underneath, but rather a frame of sharp, flat facets. It moved strangely with absolutely no inertia. It could halt instantly from full speed and turn its entire body without a single wasted motion, as if its frame had no soft tissues or joints at all, only dry mechanical levers. I stared at something that simply should not exist in our nature, ever. The creature had no lips. Its ashen skin was stretched to its absolute limit, exposing pale gums and a row of long, needle-like teeth. Instead of a nose, 2 perfectly round black cavities yawned in its face. But the eyes were the most terrifying part, or rather, the lack of them. Through the 2 hollow sockets in its skull, a bright, steady, yellowish light glowed from within. It wasn't reflecting my flashlight. It burned from the inside of its head, pulsating like a naked, white-hot, anomalous brain. The creature let out a sharp, dry wheeze, instantly dropped onto 4 jagged limbs, and with an unnatural, erratic speed, bolted across the snow-covered asphalt straight toward me. In that fraction of a second, it felt as though the very air around it was warping and rippling. It wore no clothes. Its bare, naked skin had that same gray, ash-like tint, seemingly unfazed by the 30 degrees below zero cold. I could swear I felt a slight, distinct vibration beneath my boots. Terror finally broke my paralysis. I lunged backward, scrambled up the metal steps to the driver's door of the Freightliner, jumped into the cab, slammed it shut, and locked both door deadbolts in a single motion. I didn't dare sit in the driver's seat. The windshield was too large, too exposed. Instead, I literally rolled onto the sleeper berth behind the seats, grabbed a heavy woolen blanket, pulled it over my head, and curled into a tight ball, leaving only a tiny slit for my eyes to monitor the side windows. At first, there was nothing but absolute ringing silence inside the cab. The only sound was the frantic pounding of blood in my own temples. I foolishly hoped that whatever it was had left me alone and gone back into the dark. But that was not the case. Soon, on the passenger side window right next to my head, someone tapped with chilling caution. Tap, tap, tap. It was a dry, scraping sound, as if someone was methodically tapping on the thick glass with a long, hard fingernail or claw. It was a horrifying, beckoning gesture, you understand? It was inviting me out, asking me to open the door. I lay there, holding my breath, cold sweat pouring down my back under the blanket. After a few seconds, the tapping repeated. And then, barely a minute later, the entity, apparently tired of waiting, delivered a massive blow to that same metal door. The impact was so violent that my Freightliner rocked on its leaf springs, and the suspension groaned in protest. I prayed. I clenched my teeth so hard they nearly shattered, begging God that this monster wouldn't pierce the cab body, shatter the glass, or reach my flesh, because it was terrifying to even imagine what that thing would have done to me. After a while, the creature went quiet. It walked around the front of the cab, over the hood, and suddenly appeared in my field of vision, right in the window of the driver's door, barely 2 feet away from my face. Only a pane of damn glass stood between us. God, I can still see that face pressed against the glass, 2 feet away. The creature leaned in, and that dead yellow inner light spilled over me from the hollow sockets of its eyes. Its starving mouth, locked in an eternal grin, moved silently. And as it peered into the darkness of the cab, the space near the window began to physically warp. The air trembled like a heat mirage in the dead of winter, and the triplex glass of the Freightliner began to ripple in faint waves. It felt as though the hard, flat bones of its face were pressing right through the glass, not breaking it, but melting and reshaping it. It was literally trying to seep, to squeeze through that invisible boundary, right into the cabin. And you know, it might have succeeded. It would have spotted me under that blanket if it hadn't been startled in an instant by the approaching glare of headlights. The fog behind my rig suddenly flared with a saving yellow glow. It was Big Ed on his heavy Peterbilt, rushing to my rescue just in time. Noticing the light, the creature let out a low, guttural growl, instantly leapt down from the steps and bolted toward the road. Right in front of Ed's oncoming bumper, the entity made a wild, unnatural leap into the undergrowth. In its attempt to dodge the collision, it slammed hard against the heavy steel driver's side door of Ed's truck. I lay under that blanket for another 5 minutes, completely catatonic, unable to believe I was saved. Ed finally dragged me out, hammering on my door with his massive palm. That unplanned stop, as well as the engine issue, which turned out to be a minor fix, Ed just helped me tighten a loose oil pump hose, didn't prevent us from delivering the cargo on schedule. We arrived right by 5 p.m., unloaded and received our hard-earned double pay. We drove back along the same highway, but this time we stayed bumper to bumper. Ed, of course, didn't believe a single word I said. The entire way back, he laughed hysterically over the radio, swearing that I had just had too much of that terrible pilot coffee. and that exhaustion had made me hallucinate in the fog. A common mirage. However, when we returned to the depot in Minneapolis, I dragged him over to his own truck, and right there, on the heavy steel driver's side door of his Peterbilt, was a deep, jagged, terrifying dent. The metal was crushed inward as if it had been struck by a massive blacksmith's hammer. Ed stood in front of that dent for a long time. He ran his massive fingers over the warped metal, frowning in absolute silence. For the first time in his life, that guy was completely speechless. And that heavy, tangible proof was the ultimate confirmation that everything that happened on Lola Pass was real. It wasn't a hallucination. Even now, as I fall asleep every night, I still see those glowing eyes. Never take remote highways in December, especially if the fog smells of frozen pine needles and decay.
Official report of the Somnia Bureau. File status logging date, September 18, 1999. Reporting officer, Agent 94. Clearance level 3, protocol, vector watch, anomaly, nature, and threats. The entity, classified in civilian sources as the manifestation of the cursed highway at Lola Pass, has been identified by the Bureau as a Class 5 biospatial entity, code name Walker. This anomaly executes the tracking and subsequent extraction of biological targets on the Montana-Idaho border. Primary targets in this cycle were civilian drivers Frank L., Subject A, operating the leading freightliner FLA, and Edward K., Subject B, operating the following Peterbilt 379, traversing the anomalous sector of Route 12 in December 1996. The entity's method of impact involves the temporary deformation of localized physical laws to close distance with its targets. During the contact phase, the following Peterbilt 379 came under a direct physical attack. Its steel driver's side door was deformed by high torque pressure, precisely matching a 5-pronged claw grip. Subject A's oral testimony, recorded on a TDKD-90 cassette, was confiscated by Bureau operatives during a domestic search and classified as the terminal marker of the threat manifestation. Operational results and containment measures. On the night of the contact, localized reality metrics dropped to a minimum, but the targets managed to escape the zone before the membrane breach phase could conclude. The structural damage to the Peterbilt 379 was initially masked by the subjects as an impact from a frozen avalanche fragment. In September 1999, the Bureau intercepted the original insurance claim from Midwest Haulage, replacing it with a dummy file in the Highway Patrol archives. Operating under NTSB inspector credentials, Bureau elements interrogated the subjects and secured standard non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. Vehicle repairs and moral damage compensation were fully settled through a Bureau-affiliated shell insurance structure under the guise of an undocumented road hazard payout. Currently, the entity remains localized within the forests of Lola Pass. Active surveillance is maintained via ambient intel frequency detectors.
Passive engineered containment.
To secure transit traffic along Route 12, a passive safety framework has been integrated. Electromagnetic barriers, a concealed copper-nickel mesh disguised as standard elk fencing, scatters the anomaly's fluctuation field, preventing road-level breaches. Acoustic resonators. Disguised as avalanche sensors, low-frequency resonators along the shoulders project a counter-phase waveform that dampens the membrane's sub-bass signature, neutralizing the entity's ability to track vehicle vibrations. Speed vector control, preventing operators from idling due. Case status: conserved/subject to passive monitoring. Unauthorized reproduction or copying of this record is strictly prohibited. End of report.